Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Newsroom at Home webinar. My name is Charnel Ross, and I am the Marketing Manager at Bay Area News Group. We'll get this conversation started in just a few minutes, but before doing that, I wanted to go over some housekeeping notes with you guys. First, if you would like to ask questions during the webinar, please be sure to use the Q&A feature found on your Zoom toolbar at the bottom. We will try our best to get to all of the questions at the end of the conversation. And if you have any other comments, please use the chat feature to the right of you. We definitely would love to hear from you. And again, questions, any Q&A questions, please ask them during the event. Definitely want to see you guys engage with us. The other thing I would like to mention is our next event. We definitely would like to invite you guys to register for our next event, which is going to be Fires, Droughts, and Floods, What's on Tap for the Bay Area, held on October 1st, right here on Zoom at 10 a.m. We'll be just kind of breaking down the weather in the Bay Area, what's been going on, and what else we can expect. So I do hope you can join us for that next event on October 1st. You can find the registration link at mercurynews.com/events, eastbaytimes.com/events, or marinij.com/events. So now I would like to introduce our host and moderator for this webinar, Bay Area News Group's higher education writer, John Wilner. John, you can go ahead and take it away.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate everybody joining us here. Thanks for giving me a reason to brush my hair for the first time in 6 months. I cover higher education for the Bay Area News Group, college sports as well. And if we want to get into some sports talk, we could probably do that at the end, but we're focused here on education at every level because it's a fascinating space. And I've got two panelists who are well-versed in education at every level here. You all want to introduce yourselves? Emily, introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Emily Dury. I have covered higher education at the Bay Area News Group. I cover a broader range of topics now, but that was my focus for a while. And before that, I wrote for The Atlantic magazine about K12 and higher education.
John, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm John Woolfolk, and I'm a general assignment reporter at the San Jose Mercury News. And I've been covering a lot of the K12 education issues with the pandemic.
So feel free to fire questions away to us. You know, we take them throughout or at the end, both. We thought that we would try to hit, you know, every level if possible, K through 12, higher education, you know, even preschool if there are questions about that. Certainly a ton of topics to discuss at every level. You know, for parents, for students, for teachers, administrators, it's just both a fascinating and complicated space here. We thought maybe we could start with just looking at the K-12 situation and, you know, how it's going. I personally speaking as a parent, I will say it's a San Jose Unified parent. It's been a lot better this fall than it was in the spring. And I know, John, you've got kids who are in the K-12 space. How do you think it has gone? What do you see as the differences basically in the fall compared to what we had in the spring?
Well, personally, we've only had a day or two of real school since this fall because we had to evacuate for the wildfires. And so we had 6 teachers and 90 students lose their houses in our district. So we're not actually doing real school yet. My 8th grader is doing a kind of a morning webinar where they just say hello and try to figure out who can sign on, but they don't start school for real until next week. I did talk to some parents yesterday in the San Jose Unified District, and the feedback I was getting was it's night and day, just phenomenally better than what they had in the spring, so much that they're not very eager to actually go back and do in-class learning until they're very confident that it can be done safely.
Yeah, it's certainly that's a big issue. We can get to that too. We can try to decipher the new color-coded state and county levels for sure. Emily, what have you seen thus far this fall?
Yeah, you just mentioned the color-coded tiers. That's kind of interesting. The state has these 4 tiers for when counties can reopen, and the purple tier is where most counties are, and that's where schools have to stay closed unless they're elementary and they, K6, and they get a waiver to reopen. When they move to the red tier, if they stay there for 2 weeks, then they can technically reopen. But we're hearing from a lot of districts that they're planning on holding off in a lot of cases. Not all, but in a lot of cases until the start of the year. Some of that has to do with agreements that districts have made with teachers and their unions about not coming back right away, because there are a lot of teacher concerns, especially teachers who are immunocompromised or older don't necessarily want to come straight back. So I think there was this idea that schools would sort of reopen quickly once they hit that tier, and I don't think that's necessarily what we're going to see.
Yeah, certainly from the teacher standpoint, it's a difficult calculation, right? I mean, everything from the ventilation to the amount of space you've got in your classroom in terms of deciding where you want to teach from, what the situation is at home. If you've got kids, it's going to be tough. Do you think that there will be any kind of difference in how the public schools start to come back versus the private schools? I know that's a conversation that I've had with parents.
Yeah, and I think John Wolfoot can weigh in on this too. I think we've seen some of the private schools and the charter schools apply for waivers to reopen more so than the public schools. We've also seen parents pull their kids entirely out of the public schools and go to this learning pod idea. I think there was this idea that would be more widespread. We're seeing some of that, not a ton, but that's where parents sort of get together with neighbors or whoever, and maybe 10 kids or so, hire a teacher or a tutor to sort of set up a mini classroom. And that can work for a lot of parents who have full-time jobs and maybe are struggling to supervise kids, especially younger kids who require a lot of sort of hands-on attention during the day while they're doing these Zoom lessons. But then we've also heard concerns about equity, and you're seeing those pods at sort of the higher income levels. And if you've got a tutor who can really work individually with those kids, they may progress much faster than a kid who is sitting on a Zoom lesson with 30 other kids. Maybe their parents have to work out of the house. Maybe they're in charge of watching a sibling, handling lunches, stuff like that. And I think there are these concerns about where everybody's going to be at the end of the school year, and what that sort of looks like once maybe those learning pod kids go back to a public school situation next year. It's going to be really interesting.
Got one question popped up about something you just mentioned, which is the application for the waivers to open, and whether high schools, middle schools are following the same process as elementary schools.
They can't. The state is not allowing waivers for middle and high school age grades because of the differences in the vulnerability of the students. Younger kids tend to not react as severely as older children. The reaction isn't as bad for kids generally, but it's much less for the younger grade groups. And there's also a much higher difficulty in the younger grades for them to adapt to the online school environment. And there's concerns from teachers that at the first, second, third grade level, that the kinds of things they would do in class just don't translate well to the online format. So the state has only allowed waivers in the elementary grades. There are more than 300 schools and districts up and down the state that have obtained waivers. A lot of them are private schools, parochial schools. They tend to have smaller classes generally, and so that does make it easier. I was talking to a official with San Jose Unified yesterday who was explaining that their average class size is 30 kids. It's a lot easier to do in-person class with social distancing when you have 12 kids in the class than when you have 30. So.
And some schools are doing a little bit of in-person interaction. I believe it was Gunn High School in Palo Alto that was meeting with some kids maybe who had individual, IEPs, individual plans, or they were struggling with technology. And a lot of the schools have been handing out hotspots or, laptops or tablets, but there's some limited in-person interaction happening.
Is there any way to take your best guess as to when the kids are gonna get back, whether it, the most realistic scenario is in the spring, or if it's possible that the majority of kids will be back in the Bay Area, will be back this fall? Is it just total shot in the dark, or yeah?
It's being evaluated. San Jose Unified told me yesterday that they their agreement to start the school year online was for 6 weeks. That ends at the end of this month, and they need to inform parents at the end of the month what is going to happen. I think, as Emily said, a return to the classroom before next year is probably going to be difficult, just because you have to deal with, the teacher union concerns, and,
yep.
It's just not easy to reorient your entire approach to education on a dime and just turn around and say, okay, we're going to bring them back. I mean, the state told schools in June that you better plan on starting the fall in person. And so they spent some months trying to figure out how to do that. And then a month later, the governor said that, no, you're going to have to start online unless you're in a place where there's really no coronavirus problem, which is most, of California. And so they had to turn on a dime and figure out how to do better online schooling, but they'd already been doing that anyway because they knew that was going to be a fallback that they would have to resort to. So to restart in the fall before next year, they're still going to have to figure out, how do we do the distancing? How do we, spread the kids out? What's it going to look like for high school versus younger kids if we were to do that? It's a lot of work for school administrators. So I wouldn't expect it. But for smaller schools or districts, it may be that they're trying to get at least the younger grades, the below third grade, especially, back to campus. So you might see some of that. Yeah,
I mean, I'm hopeful that my third grader might get back sometime this year, but eighth grader, I'm not. A little bit more skeptical. But what it's going to look like when they do come back, at all levels, I'm just trying to picture, having a kindergartner wearing a mask for more than 5 minutes, right? I mean, what is the classroom going to look like from the teacher's standpoint and from the kids' standpoint when they do start to come back?
We've seen a lot of different variety in that, just with the schools that have obtained waivers. Now, the masks are not required below second grade. So kindergarten and first grade, what we've seen at a school that opened in Sunnyvale a few weeks ago is they took their masks off and they put it in a little pouch that they had at their desks. It's a small school, private school. They don't have that many kids in the class anyway, so the distancing was something that they could do. We've with the older grades, it's going to be different. Those kids probably will have the mask. There's a school that I talked to in Half Moon Bay where they're doing all the class outdoors in tents because their school did not have it easy to do ventilation, and ventilation is a big thing in reducing transmission. And so they have tents set up in the courtyard where the kids and the teachers go. The Sunnyvale school I mentioned is set up in a way where they could open all the doors out to the courtyard, and so they could get ventilation that way. So it's going to look different school to school.
And the idea is to keep kids in small groups and to keep those groups the same. So you don't want, you look at a typical middle school, you've got one group of kids going from a math class to a science class, and maybe they mix in with other kids, and you're not seeing that happen this year. They're trying to keep groups of kids the same and relatively small. How well that works, I think we have to wait and see. And they're talking about social distancing at schools as well, so kids not sitting right next to each other at lunch, keeping the same groups together at recess, keeping desks far apart. Making that work on the ground with a bunch of 6 and 7-year-olds, I think that's a real challenge.
We had a question about the state assessment tests and where those stand.
Well, I'm not sure where that is actually. We haven't seen any. The state has said that they intend for the learning in the fall to be serious learning and not what it was in the spring. But whether that means administering tests to kids who are at home and you can't tell whether they are, looking stuff up, or using the calculator or whatever. I mean, that would be an extra challenge.
At the higher education level, we're seeing a number of universities that are not requiring the SAT and the ACT. There was already a shift sort of that direction, but the coronavirus pandemic seems to have sped that up a bit, where they're making those optional. And I talked to a friend who teaches at a district on the peninsula last night, and she was saying that they've been asked not to assign homework, and I think that that's an attempt to limit screen time, but that they were teaching the kids via Zoom or during the day, but then not assigning homework after that. And I think that varies by district, but that's what they're doing at her district.
Yeah, my third grader's thrilled that there's no homework. That's for sure. There's no way to know, I guess, at this point, what any kind of long-term impact of distance learning is going to have. Have you all talked to anyone who even has a theory on how much, either 9 months of disruption like this could have, 9 months of disruption could have on the kids, say, when they're ready to go back in the fall of 2021, how far behind kids may be? Is it just going to vary by the student and the school?
I think it's going to vary, and I think it depends on the family. I mean, a lot of the days, the school days are shorter this year. Yeah. The kids are not, online from 8 to 3 or whatever a typical school day is. If you've got a family that is sort of supplementing that with other educational activities, that may be fine. And maybe those aren't, on a screen. Maybe those are maybe they're painting, maybe they're, playing with blocks to learn math, something like that. But if you've got a kid whose parents have to go away to work, and maybe they have had trouble finding childcare, and that kid is kind of on their own, maybe they sign off and they're playing video games. I think it's going to vary family to family, and it's hard to tell right now.
Yeah, and as for we mentioned earlier the situation with the teachers and the teachers union. How do we know if that is a district to district situation? How does that going to break down in terms of, getting the kids back in the classroom, but keeping the teachers safe? Could we see In Santa Clara County is one situation, Alameda County is another, or will it be totally just on a district to district level?
John, you would probably be better to speak on this, but my understanding is it's district to district.
Yeah, each district, has to sign their own agreements, but I think that the unions tend to work, statewide, and there seems to be a lot of similarity. And we saw this in the summertime when they were talking about bringing back school in class, and the unions pretty much organized statewide to shut that down and say, we're not coming back to the class. We don't think it's going to be safe yet.
Gotcha.
One other issue too, there had been a push in Sacramento to sort of provide some protection for schools against lawsuits, like if kids were to get sick, potentially get the coronavirus at school, to offer some protection, but that legislation didn't make it through. And so I've also heard some concerns about potential lawsuits as a sort of concern when it comes to reopening.
The equity issue certainly is one that I hear about all the time, and we've gotten a few questions about it. And what way is there a workaround at all, in terms of the income level, the public versus private, the ability to have learning pods or hire tutors, and what if anything the districts can do to try their best to bridge that issue.
I think it's really difficult. I think this pandemic in a lot of ways has sort of laid bare these inequities at schools, and just sort of across the board. And we're seeing sort of a lack of technology in some cases, and the kids may not have Wi-Fi or laptops or tablets where they can get online, and the schools are sort of rushing to distribute those. But for a lot of kids, schools have not just been a place to learn, but they've been a place where they've received meals. They've been a place even where they've done their laundry in some cases, and there have been mentors around. And I think that's something that's difficult to provide virtually. A lot of the schools are still providing meals for kids. That happened over the summer, and that's continuing. So families that don't have enough to eat right now, especially if they've suffered job loss, can go to school and pick up meals for kids. But no, I think this is exacerbating a lot of inequity.
Do we think that there's a question about whether schools should try to start as soon as they can, and face the risk of having to stop and bring the kids back home and start back up with the remote learning, or being super cautious and waiting until it seems like, whether that's a vaccine or not, whether once they get back in, they can stay in? John, you got any thoughts?
Well, it's going to depend, district to district and school to school. The ones that have the smaller private schools are able to, they've been able to open and receive waivers to do that. And so, a larger school with more students, the public schools with unionized teachers, that's another hurdle that they have to go through that most private schools don't. So it's easier for the private schools to open if they want to and get a waiver to do that. That's just one less step that they have to deal with. They tend to be smaller with smaller class sizes, and they tend to have had a better online learning format as well. And so, like Emily was saying about the equity issues, most of the private schools were able to seamlessly go online and continue the learning, and the public schools, they just more or less shut down and didn't teach anything. And I think you'll see the same with the reopening. A large public school district with large class sizes and a school that is built for lots of kids and not factoring in the need to socially distance is going to have a harder time trying to design an in-person instruction program around all the restrictions that the state says that they have to meet to reopen.
And I think it's hard for teachers too, because they are now trying to figure out how to teach online. A friend said she feels just like the IT person. She's constantly sort of troubleshooting tech issues for kids, and that's sort of getting in the way of what she wants to be teaching. Some of them are having to put together sort of hybrid lesson plans where some of the kids are in person, some of them are online. I think this has been really challenging for teachers who, their lives have been completely upended.
Yeah, I mean, how do you even begin to do that? To teach, half your class in person and half your class online? That seems like it's an impossible ask.
Yeah. And yet we're asking it.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that really, at the start of the pandemic, that it didn't really register with me watching my kids was, the emotional and mental toil that comes with not being in school, not interacting with kids their own age, not being able to get the activity. I mean, just, they're sitting in the same chair all day. Whereas when you're at school, at least you're up moving around, you're at recess, you're walking from class to class. And, just the consequences beyond COVID just really became clear to my wife and I, after a few weeks of seeing the kids at home. And it's certainly part of the calculation that I know that the state and the districts are considering in terms of trying to get the kids back to school.
Gavin Newsom, the other day during one of his press conferences, sort of got at that, and he was saying he's got young kids and his youngest daughter is struggling to sort of look at a screen for very long. So yeah, I think everybody's sort of feeling those issues. And there was a woman on Twitter who took her kid to a doctor's appointment, and the doctor was asking about screen time, and it was supposed to be limited at the younger ages, and she was sort of saying, read the room this year, like how am I supposed to limit the screen time? But yeah, these are real challenges, and I think that it's too soon to know sort of the long-term impacts.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking as a parent, you can argue that screen time in some ways is good because it provides an escape. Like my third grader has learned how to play Minecraft, right? And we don't mind if he gets on with a friend of his and they play Minecraft together sometimes for an hour or two, but they're solving problems together. He's interacting with another kid his age, and it's an escape from the real world in some regards. And so we've kind of taken a much more open mind about the screen stuff in a certain extent than we did before. John, you got high schooler, right? What's the screen time situation there?
Well, he graduated, in the spring with a car parade. And they had online class, and it was for a few hours a day, but he completed all the work and graduated. And now he's just waiting he's going to be going to college in Oregon, and waiting for that to start. And we're waiting to see if the University of Oregon shuts down, the dorms and all that kind of stuff. The classes will be online, and as most of the colleges are doing now, but many of them have opened their dorms up to students to go up there. So that will be a grand experiment.
Yeah, the higher education, we can get into that. I mean, it's really a tough situation, right? We saw Cal State Chico, right? They opened, and then a week later, they had so many cases, they decided they needed to send the kids home. San Diego State's moving to remote only. Some schools never even got started. Stanford reversed course. Higher education, I mean, it just seems like it's, in some ways, it's more complicated because you're educating, but you're also providing housing and dining services, and how do you make all of that work right now? And it seems like the colleges are trying their best, but really struggling to even get started.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a push-pull between public health officials and college administrators, I think, because you have, say there's an outbreak at a school, and the public health officials are saying, it's not great to send all those kids home because they come from various areas, and they're potentially bringing the virus back to their home communities. But you have colleges who are saying, we don't have the infrastructure or the setup to sort of isolate all of these kids, so we have to send them home. And it's a bit of a mess. I know you said Stanford reverse course, so did Santa Clara University locally. So I think there's a lot of that pivoting. And I was listening to a panel earlier with Chancellor White, who's the head of the CSU system, and he was saying, this kind of gets at an earlier question, but he was saying that he's looking at kind of the long haul, that this is going to be the reality for 2 to 3 years down the road. This is not just this year. This sort of remote learning or even hybrid model.
Yeah, you wonder how it could just change the college experience, for good, right? I mean, they may just continue to have certain courses may just get taught remotely for the rest of time at this point, right? It's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out and what impact that has on the economics of higher education, which is something I've been reporting on recently, and what this may do to the trajectory of tuition costs, in the state and across the country. We have a question about government funding, and whether I know at the university level, the CARES Act is providing millions of dollars. Cal, I think, got 30 million, of which half needs to be spent on support for the students, and half can be spent on PPE and that stuff. What about at the K12 level in terms of the state and federal resources that are being put in?
They've picked up some extra funding at the state level, and similarly supposed to be spent on sort of preparing for distance learning and health, and these deep cleanings and stuff like that. And yeah, I think it's several $1 billion, which sounds like a lot, but I think that's going to go quickly over the long term.
Yeah. John, what do you think is going to happen with the colleges? Do you see the whole school year being remote at this point?
That's certainly a possibility. We've already seen almost all of them, pull back on in-person instruction at the higher ed level. And then there's the whole question of whether the students even go up there to live in the dorms or, stay home, and how that affects the finances of the colleges. A lot of them, my understanding is that they haven't offered tuition breaks, for instance.
Nope.
Saying that their costs have gone up with the coronavirus for various things, hygiene measures and all this other stuff. But I would expect a lot of smaller colleges will probably, private colleges will probably close because they're just getting destroyed economically. Nobody wants to pay $50,000 a year for online school. You can get that for free at community college. So
the community college, the community college thing is kind of interesting, because I think there was this notion that perhaps enrollment would go up when this started, that you might have kids who ordinarily would go away to a 4-year school that might start at a community college, more affordable, class sizes are smaller. If you're going to be remote anyway, why not? But it seems like we really haven't seen that happen. And in fact, many of them have had either a slight or in some cases significant, like 10, 15% decline in enrollment. And I'm hearing that some of that is because students that are, doing these degrees that require some hands-on interaction, like labs, or, maybe they want to, become a nurse or something like that, and they need that in-person interaction, that they're holding off on enrolling because it doesn't seem, feasible to sort of do that kind of learning online. But they've actually seen a decline in enrollment, which I don't know if that's exactly what we were expecting.
Yeah, no, not for sure, not. And you wonder how many kids are just, taking basically gap years, right? I mean, if you're ever going to think about doing a gap year and kind of resetting, traveling wherever you could travel, or just working, this would be the year to do it.
And I think there are some kids, families have been struggling with this pandemic. There's been a lot of job loss. Potentially, you've got some
Yep.
kids who are now, having help out with bills that are just staying at work where they might have gone to school. But then I think you also have some people who are saying, okay, I lost my job. I've always wanted to go get a degree. Maybe this is a good time to enroll. So I think there's a little bit of both there.
John, did you got any families you know of doing the gap year?
I know in our own district out here in the sticks, I know a family that's doing that. Their son is going overseas, I think to New Zealand or something like that. But gap years are not things that colleges hand out like Halloween candy. It's really because they don't want to grant essentially a slot for a student in school who doesn't show up. And you can imagine that in a year like this, when you might have a lot more interest in that a lot more, at some point, if you're reserving a spot for the class of 20, the 2020 graduates, and they're not taking it this year and they intend to come back next year, you start having a pile up with the students graduating in 2021 because they need spots in the school too. And so if the more you start delaying the entry of these students for another year, the more they're running into the group of graduates from the next class. And so they generally, to get approval for that, you have to demonstrate that you're going to do something really special with your gap year to justify it in the eyes of the university. I'm going to go, do a seminar on world peace and something
Right.
like that. It's not something that they just are going to give you just because you ask. And so for a lot of students, it may not be all that appealing after all.
One thing I've noticed is the colleges have, they're opening their doors as best they can, bringing a certain percentage of kids back. They know how this virus spreads. They know college kids want to socialize. And so they bring them back, and then there's an outbreak, and then the administration gets upset at the kids for being college kids, right? I mean, San Diego State has hired a private security firm to hand out citations if kids are violating, not wearing masks or violating social distancing. It's just, basically, the blame game is certainly getting tossed around in higher education, and in some ways it's kind of unfair. It's like, what did you expect the students were going to do?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's and that's one of the things that they can't control. And different schools are set up in different ways. The one my son is going to in Oregon is in a small town. It's not a large commuter school like, say, a university in a big city like Los Angeles, where a lot of the students live in town. Many of them don't need to live in the dorms. They live locally and they commute there. San Jose State is an example of a school like that. So, even if you don't have your dorms open, you don't have fraternities open, you still have lots of kids in the community out circulating. You can't control what they do. Yeah. I know that at least the school my son is going to has a testing regimen before he can move into the dorms. So they're going to give him a COVID test, and if he passes, he gets to move in. If he doesn't, he goes into quarantine. We'll see if that proves effective in tamping it down. This is one of the things that's both K12 and higher ed is trying to figure out is what works. And for this fall, we're going to find out one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I think they're grappling with the same testing shortages that have been just sort of plaguing the state as a whole. We heard a lot of talk about pooled testing, which is essentially testing groups of students or office workers or whoever at once. And it was, supposed to be a relatively quick, inexpensive way to do tests quickly. We haven't seen those pooled tests rolled out as fast as I think people were expecting. They're not necessarily widespread. And so, if your reopening plan hinges on widespread continuous testing, that's difficult to do right now.
Yeah. Well, the testing is a huge issue for the colleges. There's no doubt. And part of that's just because of the nature of the virus, right? If you get exposed, you don't start feeling sick a lot of times, if you are going to feel sick, till day 4 or 5, but you've been contagious before then. So if you're only testing the students once a week, you're just not going to be able to contain it. They're going to have to test 2, maybe even 3 times a week, and nobody has the capacity to do that right now. Right. Just like we don't in society.
Right.
There's one question we've gotten about teachers, especially at the K12 level, and whether there has been any kind of increase in retirement, and now there's a shortage, and how is that impacting substitute teaching? What kind of impact could it have in the next school year and beyond, just in terms of the available number of teachers, full-time teachers?
I haven't heard that there has been a rash of retirements yet. I think that the concession of starting the school year online has been a break for older teachers that might have been concerned about their exposure if they go into a classroom. There still is potential for exposure. I think in a lot of districts, what's happening is the teachers are being asked to come to the campus and do their lesson on an online video from the classroom. They're in the classroom alone, but they're still coming to the campus, and there's potential exposure to their coworkers, when they touch surfaces or whatnot. So, but I haven't heard of any rash of retirements, but there has been, the state has asked districts to make sure that they have adequate plans for substitutes, with the expectation that if you have an outbreak, you could see, that spreading like wildfire through the staff, and then you could be down, a half dozen teachers and need to scramble for substitutes.
And I have heard concerns about the substitute teacher situation from teachers who are saying it's very difficult to put together kind of an online lesson plan, and the prospect of handing that over to a sub and potentially for several weeks if a teacher really does have the coronavirus and needs to be out for some time, that's daunting for teachers. I don't think we've really seen that play out on any kind of scale yet. It's kind of too soon to see how that's going to work, but it's definitely something that teachers are worried about.
Do we know anything about whether California has learned from other states? I don't know if you all saw, there was that viral photo. I think it was taken in a high school, first day of high school in Georgia, by a student in the hallway, right? Just holding up her phone and taking a picture, just a packed hallway. None of the kids were wearing masks. I think it's possible that student got suspended for sharing that photo on social. But I don't know that I remember reading about the massive outbreak in Georgia lately. I checked their positivity rates. It doesn't seem like there's been a big change from when schools opened. Do we know if California is watching any particular states or other districts to learn how to manage the situation when schools do open?
Well, we can assume that they're watching, but the state, and in fact, this is a nationwide issue. There's been very little comprehensive reporting on outbreaks around the country. In fact, the story I'm working on at the moment about the utter lack of really comprehensive reporting on outbreaks involving students and staff at schools around the country. It was so bad that a teacher in Kansas, a theater teacher, started her own database a month ago, and that of course went viral. But she was just taking news stories off of out of Google searches and compiling them. There are 9 states, including our own California, that have indicated they have no plans to publicly report school outbreak data at all. They say that's a local thing. So even though you can go to the state of California's websites and find data on outbreaks in prisons and data on outbreaks in nursing homes, there's nothing on schools. You can go to the sites like that teacher set up and see aggregated reports from around the country, but what you don't know from that is that a representative sample. I think they documented outbreaks in 2,100 schools or districts around the country. Out of how many? It's something like 7,500 cases involving students and staff. But out of how many? You don't really have a sense as to how prevalent the outbreaks are or what led to them. They indicate there are some cases right here in the Bay Area, including 2 at a high school on the peninsula. They haven't opened for in-person, so presumably those classes are the one student and the staff member that were infected not at the school, but they don't indicate that. The reporting has just been terrible. There are researchers and school administrators that are trying to correct that right now. But if you wanted to try to find out just, how common are outbreaks at schools, there's not a clear picture to it, and there isn't really a lot of good data on where there are outbreaks. Did the people catch it at the school, or did they catch it at home and bring it to the school? It's a mess.
Yeah, it's the higher education situation too with what's going on the campuses is also interesting. There is now a Twitter feed that was started recently by two Yale researchers in which they rate, it's like a takeoff on We Rate Dogs. They rate the COVID dashboards for colleges across the country in terms of how well they're updating the information, what information is being provided, how easy it is to navigate the dashboard. I mean, that's kind of where things have gotten these days. Yeah, so it's we'll see. I know that they've had trouble, universities have had trouble even before they opened, right, with parties, fraternity parties. Cal had I think 1 or 2 instances where they had outbreaks that were traced to fraternity parties, and that's, there's no way to stop that unless you shut down the frats, really.
And you also have pressure from, local business owners and people like that in college towns to sort of reopen, because you think about, even like Berkeley or, Eugene in Oregon or Chico, and those towns really rely on those college students for the bulk of the year for business. And if you don't have those students there, you're sort of devastating those local economies in some cases. And so you see sort of like chambers of commerce and business owners who are really lobbying to reopen.
Yeah, the consequences are so far reaching of this, right? I think Cal and UCLA, if I remember correctly, the combined estimate for COVID, the budget hit is going to be $900 million just for those 2 campuses through this school year. And so if like we were saying earlier, this is going to potentially extend beyond this current school year, the impact on higher education and secondary education economically, emotionally, mentally, for the students and teachers alike. It's just, it kind of just makes you shudder thinking about it.
Probably a huge loss in terms of athletic dollars too, right, John, in terms of like ticket sales and stuff?
Oh yeah, I mean, just not playing football alone for some of the schools in California is $60 or $70 million, right? And that money is used to help fund other sports. And there's a big concern that golf teams, tennis teams, softball teams that could all end up being eliminated because there's no football, and football is what brings in the revenue. Cal is certainly facing that problem. They call them the auxiliaries, right? The athletics, dining, residences, all the revenue, the hundreds of millions of dollars that comes in every year from the auxiliaries has cratered. And so now schools are basically, they're trying to not lay off. They're trying to preserve the academic core, right, and the faculty, and basically hoping that the auxiliary units can kind of figure out a way to survive on their own, so that the academic mission and the faculty is able to stay intact. It's just devastating.
Yeah.
Got a question. Have you seen successful hands-on teaching methods for online learning in, say, pre-K through third grade? Anything stand out from what you've seen, heard, or read?
So this is very specific, and I don't know how widespread this is, but I have seen some success where they hand out tools or instruments to kids, and then the kids join, say, a Zoom class. And the example that I'm thinking of is there's a music teacher who sort of put together these kits for kids, basically, and she's got them all sort of playing instruments together while she teaches them on Zoom, but they're at least doing something with their hands rather than just staring at a screen. Now, I think it's probably some level of chaos, but they are at least interacting. I mean, we've seen, this isn't a classroom necessarily, but I was talking to somebody who provides therapies for kids with autism and other issues, and they were saying that they have encouraged kids to sort of use household items to sort of practice certain skills. So I think if there's a way for teachers to sort of translate what they would do in a classroom into stuff that families might have at home, there's some success there, and then kind of gather online. But I think that's really hard in a lot of cases.
John, you've seen anything that kind of stood out to you in terms of teaching methods?
I've heard from some parents in San Jose Unified that they have been impressed with some of their teachers' approaches. It's early, the ones that were more engaging and gave them time to move about. But I think everybody's just figuring this out on the fly, and it depends from class to class. I mean, it's one thing to teach math. It's another thing to teach history or English literature. My 8th grader plays the trombone in the school band. And in the spring, his teacher had him and the other students practice a part to Ode to Joy, and they blended it together into a kind of a unified presentation where they were all on video and they were playing to a click track, and it was about the best you could expect for what they were left with. I mean, it's really hard to do band remotely, so it was a creative solution, and that was in the spring. She hasn't been able to move back into her house, so I don't know, because we had a fire here, and she's down in Los Angeles at the moment with her husband, trying to figure out where they're going to live. So I don't know what that's going to look like in band class for our own student, but I think they're all trying to just figure it out on the go.
Have either of you seen, starting to wrap it up here, but reasons to be encouraged? Is there anything you've seen that makes you think, this is gonna work, and we're gonna be able to learn, and our education system is gonna be better going forward? Well, once we get through this, some things that we can take with us for years to come that will help with educating kids?
Well, I think that the switch to online and the ability to do that as a fallback actually probably is going to have a lasting impact, just as an alternative. You know, we have in our own district regularly days when we lose electricity district-wide from storms. Ordinarily, that would just be you know, we're not going to do anything, but you know, weather-related things or other stuff. I mean, it opens up possibilities that you could use another means of continuing instruction, assuming people have Wi-Fi and at least battery power to sign in and stuff like that. It's for students that become ill long-term or something and they can't show up for class. It opens the possibility that they could participate even if they can't come to class and not miss all that instruction. So I do think that might be a silver lining. You know, private schools have been doing a lot more with this, with the online learning than the public schools. They had a leg up already, and were able to seamlessly move to that in the springtime, and have continued to do that. And so, I think moving that into the public school space is probably a positive thing, at least in the sense that you could offer another means of providing instruction to people who can't be there in person.
Emily, have you seen anything?
I would just add to what John's saying. I agree. If the schools can sort of hang on to some of the technology that they've you know, had to sort of disperse, I think that'll be a good thing. In the past, you would see kids at libraries or other places that maybe didn't have Wi-Fi at home or access to a computer. And now that many districts have distributed those and hotspots, you know, hopefully it becomes sort of standard that you're making sure that every kid in that district or school, you know, has the ability to get online. Because even before this started, there were things online, you know, maybe homework needed to be submitted online, or there were updates to families happening online. And you saw some families falling through the cracks that weren't able to access those. So if that access becomes more widespread, that's a good thing. But I think we kind of have to wait and see whether that actually happens.
Yeah, like so much else about this. You wait and see, right? Wait and see.
And be ready to pivot. Yeah, I mean, schools could close if they've got outbreaks. It's, yeah, I think you know, the need to be flexible is key here.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate both of you very much joining me here for this. Hopefully hopefully some of our viewers learned something, got some questions answered. Charnel, do you out there to help send us out of here?
Thank you for passing it back to me, John. And I just want to thank our panelists as well for giving us that much needed insight into, you know, what's going on with education in the Bay Area. It's definitely something new for all of us. And so, like you guys said, you know, we just need to kind of wait and see what's going to happen and be prepared to pivot when that time comes. So that brings us to the end of our virtual event. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us for this hour. We'll be sending out a recording of this webinar in the next day or two, so please be on the lookout for that. And again, just want to remind you of our next event on October 1st at 10 a.m. It'll be on fire, droughts, and floods. We'll be discussing everything as far as the extreme weather happening in the Bay Area and what we can expect. So I do hope that you guys can all attend. And that about wraps it up for us. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.